Angela, Dave, you ready? Cool. Thank you very much. Before we carry on too much further, one thing I'll remind you, I really appreciate the nature in which this the meeting's going so far. It's great. People, you know, you didn't ask many questions or say much, so that was. But no, but in all seriousness, we are speaking in a way that people really want to listen, and we're listening in a way that people want to speak, and it makes me, I'm really happy with the way this is going so far. Also, draw your attention to this amateur AV skill coasters you've got there. I made those about 12 weeks ago, just at Makerspace. So if you are going to put them on your gift register, the whole lot cost me $12. So 12 divided by 14, I think, is 85 cents. So we expect you all to declare them. Yeah. Come on, I couldn't get any more. So that if there's any critique of the artwork, that's because it was mine. Pretty rubbish. So we'll declare the meeting once again resumed at 1:47. And we're moving on to item number, the municipal pools item, which is on page 46, which is item 10. So the purpose of this is to inform us of the outcome of the resource consent hearings and to seek approval from the Community Committee to proceed with the site restoration and interpretation plan and detailed design for the demolition of the pool. Now, we are aware, of course, that we have suggested deferring the demolition until the following year in the annual plan, which is out for submission pretty much as we speak. So there's a slight alteration in the motion to reflect that. But Helen and team, I'll hand it over to you.
Good afternoon again, councillors. So yes, this report deals with the demolition of the municipal pool. There was $1 million put into year one of the current 10-year plan. It has taken some time to work through the resource consent process. So this report provides some information on that process, but also based on your decisions at the annual plan meeting last week, also notes that that is now being proposed for the following year, which is the first year of the next 10-year plan. This report does not deal with future development of the site. It's important to note that the demolition doesn't preclude any development that council wishes to undertake on that site in the future, and that development can be considered as part of the 10-year plan deliberations or future 10-year planning cycles. I'd like to acknowledge the input from submitters during the resource consent process. The Commissioner did make special note of how well submitters came across and the information and care that they took within those submissions. We're happy to take questions. I've got Shane Drury here, who is a program manager with a community group, and also Chris Dawson, who's a project manager with BBO and oversaw a large part of council's application to the resource consent. I would just like to point out there is an error, because I didn't update it following the annual plan meeting, in paragraph 34. It says there it's got the date for demolition during the summer construction period, December 2020 to 21. Those dates would actually be, if undertaken in the first year of the next 10-year plan, it would be December 2021 to March 2022. Also, just we'd suggest a slight change to the recommendation in B. Says notes that the council approved postponement of the demolition of the municipal pool by year one to 2021-22 in the draft 2020 to 2021 annual plan that is currently being consulted on.
All right. Thank you, Helen. We'll go straight to questions. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, so one arises out of what Helen's just said, talking about the correct wording for the resolution. Point A is likely to be wrong as well, is it not, the dates?
No, that would still, we're still seeking to undertake that. Those are required prior to demolition occurring.
So the the 2021 talks about the plan, not the
Yes, the
demolition.
site
So that's not 100% clear in the wording.
Right. So
Okay,
the site
right.
restoration interpretation plan would be, we're recommending we undertake that in this coming year.
It's
That's
probably-
a requirement of the resource consent.
Yeah, no, it's probably just a,
Yeah.
is that a time-related requirement?
Well, it will take at least 6 months to complete because of the consultation.
So there's nothing
required?
necessarily to stop that being delayed by the, if it was going to be done in the same year as the demolition, that could still happen in the subsequent year.
It could still happen. One of the risks that we had outlined when we were looking at doing it this year, one of the risks that we had outlined was that it could take longer depending on how the consultation went through that process. So we'd be looking to complete it within the 6 months. So it could potentially, where there's a consultation component of any, it could potentially push it out. That would be the risk, but
you
yes.
had programmed the time to happen between now and December, with the construction December to March
Yes.
following that?
Yes.
Okay,
So yes, yes, it
wouldn't-
could.
Everything could move?
Yes.
Could move?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Now, the money was the next thing. You talked about, the report talks about the 1 million, you just mentioned it, approved in the current, in the about to start annual plan year.
Yeah.
In a week or so. But the latest figures and the other parts of the report talk about 640k being all that's needed. So am I reading right? There's, regardless of when it happens, there's a savings of 360k?
No, so that's, we have spent, so, and it does say in that we
okay.
have spent, so that million did include professional fees and consenting fees as part, so.
And there's another
And it's also
100,000 for the
prelimin-
plan as well, is
Yeah,
there not?
for the plan and some detailed design. But we're still working through the actual costs for, so those are very preliminary estimates at
But you're
this
sort of
stage.
saying to me, out of the million, 460,000, at best estimate, is being spent on bits and pieces, not the actual demolition.
Yeah, on professional fees and, yes,
Yeah,
correct.
In the
Yeah.
plan, right.
So we're all in the wrong business. Okay. Given that we've now delayed, presuming the annual plan goes ahead as per the draft, the demolition for a year, and that we intend, as in C, to talk about looking at the future of the site, including aquatic provision, is it not better that we look at that future plan first before we do anything else? Because there could conceivably be demolition or aspects or heritage aspects that you might want to include in a future plan. If you demolish them first, you obviously can't, but if you were going to say, look, we think we can redevelop the site and use this or that heritage feature for it, it might be better to have the plan first before the demolition. And that, given that we've got this opportunity, I'm not, if we'd gone ahead next year to demolish, yeah, sure, that was the vote. But given that we've now given ourselves an extra year, which is going to be when we deal with the LTP, would it not make more sense for the LTP plan to come first?
Which is what this report is now proposing.
Except you're wanting to go ahead with the, you've said...
The site restoration
Yeah.
plan.
Shouldn't that flow out of the future use plan?
I'm going to let Chris answer that question. That's okay.
Good afternoon, Councillor.
Good afternoon.
Perhaps just to clarify, the restoration plan was it's a requirement of the consent, and it's very much designed to ensure that the council consults with all submitters on the resource consent process who wish to be involved. And that was to really capture their experiences, their social history, if you will, associated with the pools, and look at ways to reflect that in the site. It doesn't presuppose or pre-decide any aspect of that interpretation, and is really looking at how can you reflect and capture that social history in some way in that finished site. And just to pick up on the point that Helen made before, is that the the plan is to leave the site in a state that it can actually be used for any future purpose, be it pools, be it park, be it adventure playground, that the council wishes.
My question, though, didn't relate to that. It related to point C. I'll read it. Notes that the development of the site, along with future aquatic provision, will be considered as part of the 2021 long-term plan. The motion doesn't talk about people's recollections. The resource consent may, but that's not referenced in here, in the recommendation. And when you say it's a requirement of the consent, that doesn't mean that it couldn't wait for a year when everything else is waiting for a year.
That's correct. Timing-wise, it could happen whenever council
Provided it
decided to do
happens at some stage,
And it has to-
within
yes.
the life of the consent,
Correct. And,
which is
yeah,
5
5 years.
Yeah.
Correct.
So if you keep the money in there for what Chris is talking about
Yeah.
in the next financial year, we'll be talking about the LTP and aquatic provision within the next 4 months, and then you'll be ticking off having considerations of a draft LTP by February, March next year, which is within that financial year. So I actually see the two can run into each other and almost contiguously. So I know what you're saying.
I always like to have plans for what's going to happen before I do something that might upend opportunities.
Yeah, I think there's parts of what Chris is talking about will have to happen, doesn't matter what you do with that site anyway, because of the consent conditions, and then we'll be probably...
But they don't have to happen within the annual plan year.
No, that's true.
Which is the
Yeah.
question. They could, as long as they're within the 5 year,
Yeah.
and everything else is within 5 years, then that's...
Yeah.
And we haven't really started the clock ticking yet.
Yeah, we're just trying to get the planning around meeting the consent conditions to mesh with the discussions around aquatic provision, and we saw some of the potential options from Sink or Swim and other people this morning for that site, but we'll have to take into account the whole of provision of the whole city. So.
Well, that's a good example, because one of the things that I don't think was Sink or Swim, might have been Christina Campbell put up, was sort of a graphic illustration of what it could look like in future, and I noticed they'd kept one feature, which was the roof of the old grandstand, but it wasn't the whole grandstand. If it was sort of a concourse underneath that, but you could see that it paid heritage homage, if you like, to the original look of that bit. So my worry is that you do a plan to do the demolishment, which includes ripping that out, which was one of the intentions, and then someone comes up with this cool design that's got a couple of features left in there, but you've already bowled it. So I'm just wondering whether it's the proverbial backside before face there, whether wouldn't be better to do your future plan, work out what you want to put in there, agree on that, and then demolish what needs to be demolished and leave up what needs to be left up, if anything.
Yeah, I'm not an engineer. I'm not even sure if you could leave something there and
Well, you
actually
might
build
have to lift
something
it off
around
and
it.
put it back again, but
Yeah.
and engineers always tell us, as you know, Lance, you give them enough money, they can do anything.
All right, okay.
Thank
So
you.
Dave, have you got...
No, that's teased out what I need.
Thank
It's
you.
possible.
Yeah, no, good questioning. Mayor Southgate, please.
Thank you. I was just going to ask a question in terms of, originally we were proposing demolition, and Dave's covered off some of my questions in respect to that. If we were simultaneously or at the same time demolishing and rebuilding, does that do anything to the costs? Or if we demolish it and it's a grass site for so long and we rebuild, are there any economic efficiencies in either way of going forward? I don't want it to be more expensive because we demolished it and then tried to start again, type thing.
Your Worship, the work that we did with civil, structural and mechanical engineers for the consent really showed that every structure, every building was very deficient and virtually needed to start again. The advice was that even the foundations were questionable, especially if there was something heavy such as a pool or a large building that was to go on it. So our advice was really that you had to demolish everything and start again, rather than looking at bits and pieces that might be retained in some way.
Okay, but in terms of timing, if you've got demolition crew in there, diggers, with cranes, whatever you use to demolish something of that sort,
Yes.
would it be cheaper to do it at the same time as you started to rebuild something, or does it make marginal difference?
There could be some efficiencies, I'd have to say. Without knowing what it might be, I think there would have to be some efficiencies in that way.
Okay, so I'm interested in exploring that in the next step of the process. Would it be cheaper for us to leave it standing for a bit, and then when we do demolish it, we start to build a new one, or if the council is willing to consider that in the LTP, that is, rather than, going to the expense of pulling it out, grassing it, landscaping it, whatever else we might do. Just interested in that.
It would save some costs of the refurbishment as a park, areas that may not be needed. So instead of filling it with a whole lot of earth and having to build a retaining wall against the age concern building, which is the plan at the moment, it might take a different approach if a structure or a pool was to go there in its place.
Thank you. And I see the recommendation, Chair Bunting, is that it goes forward to the LTP, and so that would offer us the opportunity to look at that a little further.
Correct.
Thank you.
Angela.
Yeah, thank you. Just for clarification, I read the decision, and I think possibly I know the Deputy Mayor's going to raise something, but there maybe, to be helpful, maybe we just need to be a little bit more clear, because the site restoration interpretation plan has nothing to do with what is going to be the future, what is going to be on that site. When you read the decision, it's actually about how we're going to tell that story and what's going to be salvaged, and what we're going to do for that. So it actually doesn't need to be, I don't think, terribly specific, because we don't know what we're going to be doing on that site. But just a question on, so I guess it's just making those two things clearer, because the site restoration and interpretation plan is not what we want for the future of that site when you read that document. So maybe, General Manager, you might need to, maybe it's as simple as...
We actually have to comply with the consent by doing those two things.
Yeah, no, I know. 20 days, and that has to be finished 20 days before we send the bulldozers in, but it's not, I just felt that there's a bit of confusion. That's a site restoration interpretation plan for the things we're going to salvage and the story and the history, not is it going to be a car park, is it going to be a new pool, is it going to be something else? So maybe just in there it needs to, after interpretation plan, as referred to that commissioner decision or something, or process from the appeal, just to separate that. Because that's all we're talking about right here.
I think that would provide absolute clarity then.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Angela. Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Mark. My question is to staff. I'm not concerned who answers it. In light of the fact that the city is trying to revitalise and encourage high-density living in the city, and one would assume good urban or city planning would include recreational facilities and things that are at the heart of a community. What is our strategy in regards to swimming facility for those who would be living in the CBD?
So that's going to be coming back in a aquatic provision plan, which will have options in it. Right. So you'll see that over the next 6 months.
Thank you. Is it generally staff's policy in taking action before you've done the planning? Do we
in regards to demolishing something?
Yeah. Is it generally our modus operandi that we pull down, demolish before we've developed a medium to long-term strategy of replacement? Is that our policy?
It's not a policy, but I think we have to be flexible and nimble what we do.
Right.
my understanding, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if we want to develop that site in the future, you will have to demolish the current structure that is there now, because Chris said it's not, basically it's not safe and it's not sound. So it'll have to go anyway.
Thank you. So, turning your mind to another facility in the CBD, will your approach be the same to Founders Theatre? Will we demolish and pull that down before we've developed a strategy for moving forward?
I think we might be straying a little bit wide of the report with that one, Ewan.
Possibly, but it was
Yep.
worth the try.
Yep, good try. Yep, no.
All I'll say is that that's coming up in a future agenda item in the next 2 months.
Sure.
And, one could argue that the part of that strategy is going to be achieved if the regional theatre goes ahead. And then it's about looking at the same sort of thing as what will you do to restore that site or have an alternative use of that site in the future, which is a decision for council to make or to go to consultation on.
Fine. Mr. Chair, I have 2 more questions and
Sure.
I'll try to target them more exactly.
Thanks, Ewan.
Okay. I heard, I think, is it Chris?
Yes.
Chris, I heard you say that, well, let me ask you the question. Is potentially a future use for that site a pool?
It could be.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection in your earlier statement was just that it could be a pool.
It could be a pool. It could really be anything the council wanted, and this process won't preclude anything as a future option.
On that basis, can you give me, or are you aware of any reports that would help me understand? In the public submission today, we heard of the idea of injecting some concrete, drilling some foundation holes, pouring concrete that then becomes a mechanism for strengthening the integrity of the current structure, and that engineering practice is widespread. I'm not an engineer. Are you aware of anything that would lead me to believe that's inaccurate, or can you shed light on that?
I'm not aware of that methodology myself, but what I can say is that we had some very experienced engineers, mechanical and structural, assess every aspect of those pools, including the pools themselves, and their very strong advice and evidence at the hearing was that there was no easy fix, no cheap way of fixing the pool that was there. You really had to start again and remove the entire structure, and it wasn't something that you could simply fill in some cracks and fill in some gaps. It was well beyond that.
Thank you.
All right. Any more, Ewan? You done? All right. You finished, Ewan?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One is, if the demolition is deferred for 12 months, is there a need for any further consultation to demolish it a year, let's say a year later, or does it just slide into the 21-31 annual long-term plan?
Correct.
Okay.
You would consider and deliberate on that plan.
Okay, so it would be really around doing the job and the cost.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. And I assume under 3B of the staff recommendation, council can still change the decision, the current decision to defer for 12 months if after deliberation we decide, given the feedback that we've had from our community, that we could fund it in the current year.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. And we would be able to do that if that was the decision of council?
Correct, noting that our timeframes are preliminary, and in terms of we've assumed a 6-month period to complete
yeah.
and also there's further detailed design and costing to do for the actual demolition.
Right, okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pascoe. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Chair Bunting, I just would like to request whether we can make a slight change to C in terms of the wording, and I would be very keen if we could get in there, perhaps after future aquatic provision, be referred to the River Plan and Central City Advisory Group and be considered as part of the 2021-31 long-term planning. Just because we've set up a group basically to have oversight of the Central City, to ensure some consistency along the riverbank and the Central City in terms of our planning. Just so at least it has oversight of these plans as well. And you know, we're driving for a more cohesive Central City planning situation, and so I'd be very keen for the advisory group to have oversight, if it could.
We've found ourselves, Dave's putting an amendment up, which will become the motion, but...
Fits with that, so I just think of adding some wording to refer it to the Central City.
Oh, I was going to second, but I'm happy if Dave wants to second and you just align the two.
I'll show it to you. I'll just write something out and show it to you guys.
Yeah, because I may move the staff recommendation with that in it as well. So we'll see how this plays out. Okay. All right. So you're saying in C it needs to come through the.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it makes good planning sense to do that.
Yep. I'm keen on that one.
So we're not doing ad hoc.
Partially.
Through you, Mr. Chair, can we just talk about the process? I'm absolutely fine that it goes to the advisory group. Democracy or Alliance might have a view because it will have to come back to the appropriate committee at some stage, that's all.
Yeah.
But I do take the point that the advisory group should be leading some of that conversation about this. So in that nature?
Yeah, I would suggest it's a bit of both, and that the aquatic plan will come through the community committee and the CBD plan. So
I think Lance said he was somewhat pleased with the amendment. So you've got some concerns, Lance?
Oh, no, it's just the wording's a bit clumsy, that's all, but I get the intent. I'm just worried that the CBD Advisory Committee, and I'm sure they wouldn't, might think that they're going to decide on the future aquatic provision for the whole city. I would have thought that's for council or the committee to do that, but I'm sort of being pedantic and splitting hairs.
So it's just in that context.
I'm happy for those. I think it's prudent what Deputy Mayor Taylor says. I get the intent of it. So,
Thanks, Lance. And I've just had a look at Councillor McPherson's ones, and it captures that quite nicely. So I'm happy with that if the seconder is.
Okay. No, thank you. I'll.
Do you want to pop an amendment on the floor?
Yeah, no more amendments.
I'm happy on that account to let Dave second because it's
thanks,
a
Paula.
combination of the two.
We will put yours up now, Dave, with those words in as the motion. All right, I just want to see what we've got up there at this point. Yeah, all right. Well, look, while we're doing that, Councillor Gallagher, do you have a question?
As part of the river plan and the CBD rejuvenation, whatever you do. Just the question in terms of the aquatic facilities, can you, Helen, or can you ask, I take it there will be a subsection addressed very specifically to the CBD aquatic facilities, namely we have the boys' high pool, we have the girls' high proposal, we have, I think, 1 or 2 private facilities in the CBD area, and you'll be covering who uses those and what their plans are in terms of issues, one of local school access and public access.
Yeah, all of the above, and throughout the whole city. And to be honest, it'll link in with the inner Waikato area, because the regional sports facilities plan has comprehensive information, which some of the submitters this morning actually showed the assessment there, and it'll talk about the number of users, against national averages and what's the best practice and that
Can
sort of thing.
you, obviously, the CBD, Councillor Jeff's, Deputy Mayor Jeff's panel, obviously you'll be able to have some of that, a lot of it's still come here, but I think some of that material would be very useful as well, because obviously the issue is the access of people who live in central Hamilton to appropriate aquatic facility.
Absolutely, yep.
And the other question too, can you pick up, and the absolute open mind, there was reference, examples used, and that you might go right from the Brisbane South Bank type, dare I say, what I thought years ago was a paddling pool type of thing, to a Mount Maunganui facility, which I think is different possibly to the sort of the swimming. It may have some practice swimming lanes, but it's, you know, I'm just wanting to measure horses for courses as well. So what I'm trying to ascertain is what existing facilities are and what they are not in terms of grades of swimming, you know, versus the full-scale Olympic pool versus a Mount Maunganui style aquatic facility.
Yeah, and we'll talk about what the trends are in use by the community.
Yes.
And we've had a lot of conversations around leisure water space,
Yeah.
as well as lane swimming space, and then space for water polo and underwater hockey and a whole bunch of different things. So we'll cover all those aspects of swimming. It's as councillors will know, it's you know, it's not as simple as it seems. It's reasonably complex.
And just final question, you know, again, I'm aware, you know, of the boys' high evolving development and the girls' high, and will be interested to see what access neighbouring schools, you know, can have to those facilities versus, I think the point was made that one school buses all out to Te Rapa. So I think it's just interesting because if I recall, on both schools at different times have stressed the community aspect of their pool proposals and developments. I'd just like to test that out with evidence in terms of public access or proposed public access to those facilities and neighbouring schools' access.
Yeah, we can do that, which will include our partner pools and Hamilton Boys High School is one of those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, where are we? Councillor Van Oosten.
Thank you, Chair, and acknowledging that I wasn't here at the beginning of the conversation, so if this question has already been answered, then my apology. It's just with regard to the costs, and should we decide to defer the demolition works, are there additional costs that we would need to consider or take into account in keeping the site as it is?
We spend minimal on keeping the costs, keeping the site as it is, but it does also show. So, I mean, the obvious answer to that question is the longer that it is there in its current state, the more deterioration that we will see. We don't have funding to maintain it in any great sense, other than, you know, some security and some anti-tagging kind of.
Okay, and in terms of the ongoing deterioration, is there any risk of anything catastrophic happening that would require us to act in an earlier capacity?
It is one of the reasons, alluding back to actually Councillor Wilson's comments around strategy and, you know, why are we looking at demolition before having something to develop on the site, and safety is an issue. So as long as it continues to deteriorate, it will continue to increase, and you know, or the stability will become less stable over time. It does have a high earthquake prone risk, which is stated in the report. So it is something for council to consider long term. So in terms of if you were going to put off the demolition until you had something to build on the site, we would probably be recommending that it would be something that you would develop in the short term. Yeah, so it's not, we wouldn't recommend that you would leave it there long term. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to carry on with a couple of those questions that Maxine's been asking there, and to just ask one of Dave's questions again. So with the resource consent, or the consenting hearings that we've just had, there was no time limit on when this was to be done by, is that right? So this doesn't take us too close to the sun with that?
No, but resource consents do last for five years, noting that there was a time frame in place when we went for the consent, but it wasn't dealing with the timing, so there was no condition given on when it should be done by.
Okay, okay. And one of the presenters actually in their graphic had a picture of the pools at present. They were tagged and they would look pretty hackery, implying that people can get in there. How safe or dangerous is it at the moment?
Yeah, since the site's not really had anything going on there for a while, there are holes in the fence, so people can get in. A number of the buildings have been broken into, and I believe there was some issues a few years ago with people sleeping in there as well. I guess the risk is you've got an open hole in the ground that somebody could fall in if it was dark in the middle of the night. It's not lit or anything like that, and I guess it kind of just attracts that type of activity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you've considered or could do to make it safer in the meantime?
We've not considered it, but we probably could if we're going to be deferring the demolition process.
For another year? Okay. More fencing? And, yeah, okay, but you couldn't cover up the hole or anything to that effect? Is that right? No. Okay. Councillor Dave, you got another question?
It was just the last question that you asked, eliciting that there are holes in the fence and homeless people sleep in there, and there might be a hole in the ground that people fall into at night, and other all sorts of doom like that, which was an interesting question because I wondered, and the earthquake prone and things like that, I wondered whether it was more or less earthquake prone than other abandoned public buildings around, like Founders Theatre, for instance, and whether we would normally leave holes in fences in situations like that, or we'd fix them as BAU.
Yeah, we will.
We will. So the hole in the fence...
We have been and we will, but, you know, if it happens regularly, then I think what Councillor Bunting was alluding to, that there could still, people could still make holes in there and get in there, which we will do our best to keep it safe. We've got an obligation to do that. So. And
they could, still fall off the river pathway into the river and have to be rescued, and various other things like that could happen, couldn't they?
Absolutely, there's a multitude of things that can happen to people on our public spaces.
And we follow our best care, duty of care procedures.
Absolutely.
In situations like that, as soon as we know there's a slip on a river path, we close it or whatever. That's sort of life in a river city.
Yeah, and I think you'll realise the intent of my question was just to tease out the very real cost of what we're doing, and not to suggest against it in any way.
But it can be covered under BAU, business as usual.
That's what I was trying to find out.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty happy that it can. Yeah. Cool. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, Mr Chair, thank you for a second bite of the cherry. In light of some of the doom that has been presented in the last answers in relation to the last few minutes, are staff still comfortable in suggesting that we delay? As I recall, I think it was staff who recommended we delay the demolition by 12 months as a result of financial hardship stemming from COVID. In light of the security risks that have been highlighted, are staff still comfortable?
If you recall in the annual plan, there was a list of things that council consider, but they weren't staff recommendations. And council made the decision to bank the deferral as a saving and go out to consultation on that.
Thank you.
Mike, in terms of a long-term delay versus a short-term delay, I think there's a difference in a staff response to that. So from a staff response, I think we're reasonably comfortable with a delay of a year. If council wanted to consider a longer-term delay, that's a conversation that we'd want to have to look at the risks further.
There's nothing proposed more than the 1 year delay for anyone. Is there?
No. That's what I was just trying to get some clarity on. All right. And my last question to the General Manager is the implications of this delay as opposed to the staff recommendation, as you see it.
Yeah, I just want to, maybe Councillor McPherson can clarify for me. So if we go through looking at the aquatic provision in the LTP pretty much from in the 2021 financial year, and then this time next year we'll be approving the LTP, which means then we wouldn't be able to do the site restoration plan, start that until the 1st of July next year.
Yeah, that was a question I specifically asked Helen, and she said yes, it all could be could be moved. She didn't say she said it could be moved 1 year, 12 months. I think.
Then the site restoration plan and detailed design, Helen, could take up to 6 months.
Yep, she said that.
And then you'll be demolishing the pool in early
December to March 2021 to 2022, which was 12-month delay potentially for everything.
Okay,
And
cool.
she said that was possible to be done.
Yeah, okay.
Because the construction wouldn't happen, the demolition wouldn't happen until summer anyway.
Okay.
But thank you for repeating it.
That's all right, I just want to be absolutely clear.
Yeah, I'm trying to just make sure I'm clear on it too. Okay, any further questions? Amendments, I'm not going to put up an amendment. So, Dave, you've moved that. Ewan, you have seconded it. We'll move into debate. Councillor Dave.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. It became apparent that Mayor Paula was also thinking of similar things when we did this, so this is certainly not meant to cut across her, but the early questions certainly made it obvious to me and to some other councillors that the best way to handle the situation is to look at what we need in future, and in terms of aquatic facilities, what would be good, if anything, in the central city, which is why I responded positively to Jeff's suggestion that it should be in sync with our other developing thinking for the central city. We want that part of the central city precinct to look and feel like it's adding to the community wellbeing in the city. Let's get that thinking done and locked into our LTP. Then you go on to the specific demolition plan and replacement plan and heritage side of things that have all been mentioned. That is a much better way to handle this. It wasn't the original plan. The agreement, the democratic decision was to demolish, but the annual plan deliberations have put up this opportunity, and I'm suggesting that it's wise for us to take the opportunity of getting the big picture looked at first before we home in on the detail of that particular piece of land and particular piece of kit that we've got in place. I think one of the important things that Mayor Paula raised was that if you're going to do physical earth-moving type work, and then you're perhaps going to do construction afterwards, you could synchronise the two and perhaps achieve savings. Certainly should be able to put it, we're now in a position to be able to consider that. So that's wise as well. And if we synchronise that with how we're looking at things like Sappermore Jones Place and future bridges across the river and development of that, what we call the arts precinct originally, down that end of the town, let's have all those balls in the air at the same time, not sort of pull the corner of the rug out while we're still trying to deal with the rest of it. So I just think this is a better order of handling things. It doesn't say we're not going to demolish it. In fact, it seems likely, even from Sink or Swim's and Friends' presentation, that whether you call it demolition or not, there's going to be a replacement at the very least, and the replacement is essentially going to be new, even if it has some heritage features. But it's not trying to second guess that. It's allowing for that possibility, allowing for all possibilities still to fit in with the big picture. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor O'Leary.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to be quite critical of the process, and this is not directed at any staff. This is about our democratic process in this council as governors. This is one of those decisions that I even though it looks like I wasn't here for the vote, but way back in 2015, I'm sure councillors Wilson and McPherson are quite frustrated because they did put up 670,000 to refurbish this, and it didn't happen. And then that was followed by Chesterman and Councillor Forsyth's motion to put up 4.5 million over the 3 years, but to rebuild the pool. But that aside, look, I'm very happy with this motion, and the delay in the annual plan made sense to me so that we could come up with a proper vision for the future of this site. But Councillor, and I support what Councillor McPherson just said, with one point, which I have raised. This is not against Councillor McPherson, but I have raised my frustration with this. This council never made a formal decision in this chamber to demolish those pools, and I have raised this. $1 million slipped into the LTP with no discussion, and I raised it then. So we didn't make the decision to actually demolish. I did look in the LGA during the election process, actually, when this issue came up, and I found something that I can't find again, which actually said just because something's in a budget, that doesn't formalise it as a decision. So that's been my frustration. You know, this is one of those things where over the Christmas period, I did a lot of investigation. I read every report I could get my hands on, and there are so many unanswered questions that moving forward for that site I'm going to want answered. One of them is that apparently in the environment, Māori were buried, and they were then subsequently moved. So where they were moved to, I don't know. One of the reports that I read said that the site could also come under Tainui land claim. So has that been assessed? I don't know. So there's frustration, and there are still a lot of questions outstanding. I've read every single report that I could get my hands on since, I think, 2013. It might have been even earlier than 2000, actually. I've got a whole list. So I'd really like to be involved. I'm on the Deputy Mayor's River group, so I'll certainly bring all of my research and information there. But I just wanted to say formally again that this council did not make in this chamber a decision to demolish, and that frustrates me. Thank you.
Oh, I was waiting for the bell to tingle. It's right on time. Well done. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I support these recommendations we've got here. I think they take us where we need to go with this site. We've had some really good submissions today, which just reinforce how passionate Muni Pool supporters are, and reinforces for me, if it did need reinforcing, that we need to do something special with this site to recognise that passion if we possibly can. And I'm respectful of Councillor Angela's strong views on this issue. As we know, consent has been granted for the demolition, which I thought was prudent. I thought it was a tough decision, but the right one. But deferring demolition, I think, does not only save us some money in the short term, but does give us more time to put some more thought into the site and give it the love it deserves. And I find myself in a strange position recently of agreeing totally with Councillor McPherson on this, in terms of coming up with the big picture before taking action. And you'll be well aware that the River Plan and Central City Advisory Group, we're helping to develop a blueprint to bring back to the council for discussion along this whole area, you know, VOTR all the way down to Museum, Ferrybank. And so it fits in with that, just as it fits in with Councillor Bunty's community services work with the aquatic stuff. So in a wider sense, the council needs to decide what it wants to do here. Do we want to explore some sort of water facility in this space? Is it viable? Is that the best option? It may well be. And I would say to the very passionate Muni Pool supporters, work with us on this. The delay gives us the opportunity to develop and present a plan over the LTP that actually excites the community, that gives them something back instead of just taking something away. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mayor Southgate.
Can I raise a point of order or factual clarity? Can I just do that?
Yes.
I'm not saying Councillor O'Leary's wrong, I just need to be refreshed. Did we take a decision to demolish the pool? I thought we did.
We have legal advice to the effect that by putting the money in the LTP that we had made that decision.
So by approving, last time with...
Paula, with respect, we're not going to go down that road.
No, it's a point of order. So by putting the money, by agreeing to put the money in the LTP, that was tantamount to having decided. I'm just trying to be clear, that's all.
Yeah, that's the legal advice we have, that's my understanding.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
I'm not going to debate it because I think Angela will raise those questions quite rightly when we get to the next thing.
Okay, so I have you down for debate. So
Yes, please.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. We've got two things converging here, in my view. Our desire to make the CBD a thriving and vibrant place, and I do take that seriously, which is why, of course, I set up the CBD Advisory Group under Deputy Mayor Taylor's leadership. The second thing that we have converging on this is that we do all acknowledge that aquatic space is not sufficient for our growing city. So I'm happy to support the recommendation, and potentially, if we talk about it some more, to explore the concept of community willingness to help fund, as we have done in other situations where the community has come to the table with some funding and we've been able to partner with them. But I think that's a conversation for the LTP, but it's one that I'm certainly willing to explore. And that's it.
Thank you, Mayor Southgate. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Mark. It will come as no surprise that I'm very pleased to support my good friend Councillor McPherson on this motion. We often now talk about the importance, once we have a council asset, of maintaining it. There has been some very dark days in this council's history where we've turned our back on city assets and didn't fund it. And chickens come home to roost, and the chickens arrived. I said back in 2015, when Councillor McPherson and I tried to move, as Councillor O'Leary has pointed out, 650,000 to refurbish this facility, because we had failed miserably. We had deliberately, as an organisation, decided we didn't like the pools and we weren't going to fund the repairs. We orchestrated this outcome. And I say we because I'm part of the organisation. And as fate would have it, we now have an opportunity to have a more meaningful dialogue and revisit this issue. And I don't think I have to say to any of you that, hey, before making a decision about destroying something, should we not develop a strategy and a clear plan that articulates what we would like to do to replace it? And it makes a great deal of sense to do that in conjunction with the Deputy Mayor's committee that has the sole focus on helping to revitalise the CBD and the river. And to do it without having that plan is a poorly formed strategy. I've heard the argument regarding, well, we've now got to meet our obligations under the consent. We now know very clearly that, in fact, we've got 5 years. I want to live in a city. In fact, I do live in a city. I live right in the heart of the city. I live in Victoria Street. I love to swim. And I would love the idea of being able to walk down to a facility. And this city's entire strategy has been talking about the need to revitalise the heart of the city. We've talked about the importance of having a central transportation hub. We've talked about encouraging affordable housing in the CBD. Guess what? When we achieve that, and it's a worthy goal, rightly so, these people will want facilities. They'll want world-class facilities. And we have an opportunity here to think really carefully under the Deputy Mayor's guidance to come up with a meaningful strategy. And then let's make the decisions. Don't destroy something, and I would argue the same for founders. Think carefully. This motion enables us to think carefully.
Thank you. I will sneak in a couple of words before Dave's right a reply. I thank you, Dave, for putting the horse back before the cart with us. I think you're right. There are two plans that the Sink or Swim group and the submitters have actually alluded to. One is the central city. Is it a place of beauty? Is it a place of function? And the other one is the aquatic plan, and that's the one I'd like to focus on here. At the moment, we've got Fast Lane, which is a private facility, Hamilton Girls, Hamilton Boys, the University Pool, which is an outdoor pool that's open only over the summer times, Gallagher Aquatic Centre, Water World, potentially a pool in the Rotorua. People have private swimming pools, and that's about it. We are desperately under-laned when it comes to swimming, and we'll be working hard to put a very strong aquatic plan before us, be able to enact something before the long-term plan. That's what we're going to work extremely hard on. So I'm supportive of this. When it comes down to being a doom merchant, I make no apology for answering questions about the citizen safety of this town. All I'm asking is, can we safely sustain what we've got now, which is a strong memory and a hole in the ground. That's what it is at the moment. So as long as it can be kept safe, I'm absolutely fine with that. But I make no apology for asking about the safety and well-being of our citizens. So I'll be supporting this as well. And with that in mind, I think we should head to the board on this one. After we've had a right of reply from Dave, Councillor McPherson. Sorry, Dave.
Mr. Chair, was that I do look forward to sitting in a heated outdoor pool there, sipping one of Councillor Wilson's maple whiskies, which is very nice. Thank you.
Just the world's most horrible visual. Okay, here we go. So we'll move to the board, please.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Well done, Dave. Thank you.
Oh, right, yeah. Perhaps, yeah. But at least we'll know what we're going to do.
These guys a bit more of a life, haven't they breathed for another year?
But they were already putting designs about what the future will be.
All right. So while we're on the
give them some credit
on the easy topics, we'll move on to the Captain Hamilton. Item number 15, which is on page 78 of Diligent. Don't even joke about it. Right. Okay, so the purpose of this, and I will be running this quite tight, is to receive a report on the events of Captain Hamilton and the statue out there, and to find out what we would like in the report on the 13th of August, or what we'd like in that work stream. All right, so that's what we're trying to establish at this meeting. We're not trying to relitigate anything that's happened. We're trying to work out what we want to know and what we want to find out so we can make the best decision for our community moving on. So that's where we're going with this one. So, Chief Executive, I'll leave it over to you and then we'll... Yeah.
And this relates to information being provided for this meeting.
Yep.
We received an email last night from General Manager Sean, which I did respond to, relating to a late report which staff had planned to give us for this item, which they no longer were, and I think we should have that report for this meeting. It's the items in the report in question are not secret. They're all a matter of public record. It's just that someone had collected them together into one document. So it seems to me that for us to even discuss this without that in front of us means half a debate, if you're lucky.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think if we're talking about the same report...
The O'Malley report.
Yeah, the O'Malley report, yeah. Richard, could you shed some light on that?
Sean, I'll get you to cover the O'Malley aspect of it.
Anyone else you want to pass it to?
I'm looking around with this sort of...
Feed the backs. We're just about the full back, so let's go.
Keep going round, Sean.
Thank you, Chair Mark. So the report that Councillor Dave's referring to is a report by Vincent O'Malley. So we commissioned Vincent O'Malley to do a report, into historical research report into a number of people who sort of place names in Hamilton are named after. So that was a report that we jointly commissioned with between Hamilton City Council and Waikato Tainui. We received the draft report in March, and we are waiting to get the final report from Mr. O'Malley. We did meet with Waikato Tainui last night, and they asked for a couple of extra days to socialise the report with mana whenua before we finalise the report. So we had hoped that after last night's meeting we would be able to table that report for this meeting to help inform the discussion today. However, Waikato Tainui, as joint commissioners of the report, have asked for that extra couple of days so that mana whenua can have input into the report before it's finalised.
As you rightly said, Mr. Chair, is effectively the next steps, which will consider all that information and any other additional information the elected members wish to see in that report to actually make the conversation as robust as possible. And I think there will be a number of next steps on this one as well, Mr. Chair, as we progress through the development of intellectual property in this area.
Okay, so I think your point of order has been answered.
Mr. Chair.
Hang on a second there, Paul.
Okay, I didn't know we were going to debate the point of order.
No, we're not. But I will hear from Mayor Paula if she's got something to add to it.
Yeah,
Is it
sure.
all right? Thank you.
Not a debate, Councillor McPherson, just a piece of information. We did have that meeting with Waikato Tainui last night, and it transpired that a number of the key people at their end haven't been able to read the report. Now, you guys have all had it confidential for a couple of days. I'm quite happy for it to go out publicly as soon as possible, but I think it would be respectful to just honour their request for a couple more days.
Look, I understand that point and respect that point. The quandary is that every bit of information in there is public, so already somewhere or other. It's just that it's been collected together by Professor O'Malley, and you know, all of his items in there are reference to the source document. So but it may be a moot point. If we're not going to debate the substance of it here today, then I'm sort of relaxed. But
Thanks,
if we
Dave.
were, then I would say we need that in front of us as part of the debate.
Yeah, and I think while it's not helpful that it's not here, I think I'd prefer to stay respectful on that point, and it will be here by the time.
Do we have your assurance that, like the Chief Executive said, that we're not debating the substance of it?
Point of order, though, I think we're going a bit stray because the topic today is actually the statute and the process around how we decide the statute. But that was a piece of information that was attached. And as I say, quite frankly, I'm happy for people to see it, but I honour our partners in Waikato Tainui for a few days.
If you just wait, Ewan, we'll deal with this one first. So, Richard, could you answer that?
Effectively, just to reaffirm what the Mayor was going to say, the purpose of today's report was for me to answer any questions based on my advice to remove the statue, and then the General Manager was going to talk about the next steps going forward. So very much it's a point-in-time conversation rather than a substantive conversation.
Yeah.
That's the only comment I was going to make, Mr. Chair.
I'm pretty sure I'll roll along with that, Dave.
Well, I guess, yeah, sure, but as someone that's seen that report, I can't unsee it, and I believe that if necessary, if we start discussing the substantive topic, then I'll be within my rights to quote pieces that are quoted from original public documents.
And that's fine, and we won't get into a big long debate about it, but the question is, are we going to go down the substantive line, or are we going to talk about the procedure? Thank you. Ewan, you had a point of order?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My point of order is page 6 of the standing orders. I refer you to item 9, meeting agenda. When I look at, and now I refer you to page 78 of the agenda today, under the item 1 it says purpose, to inform the Community Committee of events surrounding the removal of Captain Hamilton's statue from Civic Square on the 12th of June 2020. Your narrative as you commenced the meeting was, in fact, the purpose of today's meeting, and you would restrict questions that would only deal with the next step. I point out that in fact, is in breach of our own standing orders, where in your own agenda, which you moved at the beginning of the meeting, in fact, you put in place an agenda that says we are definitely going to talk about the events surrounding the removal of Captain Hamilton. So can I have a response from governance as to how you can have an item like that clearly indicated on the agenda, and our own standing orders then enables us to speak to it. But the chair is now suggesting that, in fact, no, there'll be no discussion on the events surrounding the removal, and all discussions will simply be on the next step.
Yeah, I'm just getting advice in my ear at the same time as I'm trying to speak. Yeah, look, I guess what I'm trying to do is clarify that this is about the process, and I'm not going to be unduly restrictive. I'm just asking people to stick to the process of what we're trying to do. So I apologise if I gave the impression that I'm going to try and hem you in. Okay. So I'm certainly not trying to do that.
Thank you for that explanation. So we are going to be able to talk to and ask questions surrounding the events of the removal of Captain Hamilton.
Yes, absolutely.
As per the agenda, as per item 1. Yep. Thank you.
Got that? Right, any other points of order, or are we all... Oh, for heaven's sake.
My question got elevated because I
that's
spoke.
right.
It didn't.
So
went
we'll
down
go
the
with your
list.
question first, Mayor Southgate, if that's all right. But after...
That's fine.
You're going to speak to this report, Richard?
I'll take Richard.
Okay, we'll go there. All right.
Oh, so we're right into questions.
We're straight in.
I can give an introduction. I thought we've already... Okay, so I'm just going to cover off... I made the decision to have the statue removed based on taking advice from my team, and it was quite a comprehensive piece of advice across a number of individuals. The main reason was out of concern for council assets. There were 2 assets in that case. There was Captain Hamilton, and despite its history or otherwise, it was a gift to the city and is actually an asset of the city. The second part is the car park structure that actually forms the base by which we could have assumed that the Captain Hamilton statue was attached to, and there was some advice we had from our roading team that may well have undermined, if not for the removal, the nature of the equipment that would be required to remove it may well be over the weight capacity of that car park building, and that was a significant consideration. And then those two drove me to have a broader consideration for the health and well-being of the general community, but specifically those people involved in the Black Lives Matters march may well have also been put in harm's way. And so the night before I removed it, I had a conversation with my experts, and once I was well aware of the broader health and safety risks, I made the decision to pursue and remove it. Now, making it really clear, I removed it on an interim basis. I use the word interim because ultimately the decision by where that statue goes and putting it there in the first place is a matter for this council, not for me. And I just wanted to make sure I addressed those concerns that I had in terms of stepping forward. And that's my brief introduction as to why I removed the statue, Mr. Chair.
Certainly, Lance.
And the second part of this report under next steps is when we had a look at that after this action last week was to actually, knowing that council would have to have some consideration of what happened with the Captain Hamilton statue in the future, and just thinking through the context and a number of discussions that have happened, some proposed pieces of work that have been put, one of them especially has been put into the draft annual plan for consultation, which is the development of council's Māori strategy, and the other contextual pieces of work are obviously the O'Malley report, which is coming forward around culturally sensitive place names and sites, obviously for individuals, which some streets are named after. The other piece of contextual information is how we recognise our history and tell our stories across the city in the future. And probably a key thing is a review of our public art development process for permanent artworks. And there's been some discussion in staff, that's on our review, our work program for the community committee anyway for this year. And there's been some discussion amongst staff and looking at what other councils do. Should we have a separate process for statues and monuments? And then probably a key thing is who do we include in these tranches of work as we work through them, and we're proposing, which I'm not sure if we put in the report, that we actually have a briefing with councillors so that you can give us some guidance around who you may want and the scope of these pieces of work. The idea is that after that briefing, we'd bring a report back on the 13th of August so that that can be formally considered by this committee, and then we can move forward from there and provide that contextual information for a decision on what happens with Captain Hamilton in the future.
Thank you, Lance. All right, we'll move on to questions. Ms Southgate.
Bunting. Richard, is it your view that you had credible reasons to remove to think that Captain Hamilton could be damaged on the day of the Black Lives Matter march?
It was predominantly the well-being of the marchers and the protection of council assets. So, yes.
So there was a credible threat to public property.
I understand your question now. Sorry, Councillor Mayor Paula. Yes, based on the information that was reported in the news, very much so there was a risk to those assets and or people.
And a number of the public are confused with thinking that this was done because Waikato Tainui expressed an interest in the statue not being there. My question to you is, if you had not received that correspondence from Waikato Tainui at that time, would you have still recommended that the statue be removed for public safety?
Yes.
Finished, Paul?
Oh, I have, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
Thank you, Chair. And look, in keeping with your introduction and the information that I think we may need for both the future briefing that Lance has just referred to and our meeting on the 13th of August, I've got two questions which are around the information I would like to see in those reports. And the first one is, when I read the past minutes and the business plan which are attached to this agenda, I note that there was, there's an indication that there was consultation on the Captain Hamilton statue with Tainui and iwi, and I refer everyone to page 111 if they haven't seen that. Can we see some evidence of this and the extent of this in the reporting back, whether it's at the briefing or at the meeting on the 13th of August?
Yep, Lance.
Yes, if
Page 111, which are the additional notes.
From 2012.
Yeah, which are from the 2012. There are minutes there as well as a business case.
Yeah, point 4 when you're saying Tainui and local iwi.
Which covers off the groups who were involved in the discussion.
So you're after some detail?
Yeah, just to the extent of the consultation that was conducted then, with Tainui and with iwi.
Absolutely.
Which is what's stated in there.
Yep.
And my second question is around Lance's comments around, trying to bring a resolution to this with our current work on Maori culture. And I just want to refer Council to, and I'll try and pronounce it right, a report called Naha Tapawai U Hutu Moana, which is an 87-page report by Hamilton City Council as a result of collaboration with local hapu, and was published in April 2003. And I think that took about 3 years for that full plan. Dave's nodding his head, so he remembers. Right. And it seems to be quite detailed around the naming of various sites around Hamilton, which may be of relevance in terms of Professor O'Malley's report and what has previously been discussed and presumably agreed upon. I just think that report's been overlooked in the past, and I did raise it in the last term that report's still sitting on our Google website somewhere.
So you'd like that made available?
On our virtual coffee table.
A virtual coffee table. Is that all right, Lance? Can we drag that out?
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Good questions, Rob. Thanks very much. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Mark. Richard, just a couple of questions. On what day and roughly at what time, having reviewed the information that you had at your fingertips, did you decide to order the removal of the statue?
So I'm just checking my diary because I can tell you the exact time, Councillor. So Thursday. So we had a staff meeting, or a meeting regarding Captain Hamilton on the Thursday the night before, and that meeting was at 5 o'clock, and it was during that meeting that once I understood the physical harm as well as the individual personal harm issues that I made the decision and instructed my team to basically pursue for the removal. At that point in time, we'd had a preliminary assessment, I'd call it an observational assessment prior to that, by a contractor to go and look at the item during that day on that Thursday. But a more exhaustive investigation was done about 8:30 the following morning when we went back on site. But pretty much I'd ordered at that stage that I wanted it out.
Right. So Thursday
about
1700.
Yep.
Just if I can just ask an additional question in regards to the information that you collated to determine a public safety issue. Did that take the form of police discussions? What form did it take?
Yep, so there's probably a couple of aspects. It took the form of discussion with staff primarily. It took the form of conversations mainly in relation to the broad safety issues. And one issue I didn't talk about in the introduction, it was also, I took a broader consideration of whether or not a more, how do you put it, if we had stood back and let the statue there, what were the downside risks versus the downside risk of removing the statue? And there's broader downside risks if we left the statue there, not only in terms of the physical harm, potentially escalating issues, broader issues regarding our safety and the marches and so forth. So it wasn't only just the physical harm caused to people by the removal of the statue, it's also potential harm it would have caused to a level of tension and anxiety being raised as well. So that was part of the consideration through talking with our experts who have been in contact with the police and so forth. So I never had the direct conversation with the police, but some of my staff did.
Thank you. An additional question, if I could, Chair Mark. When you made that decision at 1700 on the Thursday, did you discuss how you were going to manage the communication, and whose role was it to, I guess at that stage, having made the decision, advise elected members of that decision?
Yep, so involved in that conversation so I'll talk about the multiple parts. Involved in that conversation were our comms team, our various staff teams and so forth. So from a chain of command point of view, I issued commands to my team. Mayor Paula was also part of that conversation and took it on herself to follow up and notify the elected members of the decision I made.
Thank you. Can I now ask just a couple of questions going slightly back, if I can, regarding the location of Captain Hamilton?
To best I can answer those questions, I might have to rely on some staff to help me out with those, Councillor Wilson.
Sure. It does appear, if one looks at minutes from the 28th of September 2012 and subsequent minutes of the 25th of October 2012 of the Public Art Panel's minutes, that the decision of its location was very much made by the the Public Arts Panel. That wasn't a committee of council as such, was it?
I don't think it was, but I'll ask Councillor Lance. I'll ask Lance to respond to that.
It's a panel that was appointed by council and essentially had a number of external people on it, plus the museum director.
Thank you. And had council in a roundabout way delegated its responsibility to this panel to formulate the ideal location?
Well, part of what the Public Art Panel's mandate was to work with the applicant and to also work with staff and with a three-stage process and look at the opportunity analysis, really the opportunity first and a potential site, and then the Public Art Panel's was to give advice on whether they thought that was a prudent site, and if it was a site where, or outline what were the pros and cons of that site. So they were to give advice around all those sort of curatorial matters relating to site, the concept design and those sorts of things.
Thank you. There is indication that in the minutes reflecting that the Public Arts Panel took a lot of advice from NAMTOC. Could you remind me what NAMTOC was?
So NAMTOC was the Manatopu o Kirikiriroa. It's a organisation that represented 5 hapu that council had a contractual arrangement with for consultation on mana whenua matters. And so through that period, and this process happened quite quickly, if you look at the minutes of the meetings, of council meetings, of the Public Art Panel meetings, and they were generally giving advice to a number of parts of council on a number of matters, including resource consents and park management plans and public art proposals, etc.
Thank you. Using your memory, was there anything unusual that happened at that very time concerning NAMTOC?
I'm not going to use my memory, but I'm going to use, having looked at through some of the documentation, I wasn't personally involved at the time, but my understanding, and Sean might correct me if I'm wrong, between the first meetings of the Public Art Panel and the council committee, and then the second one's in November, NAMTOC went through a situation where my understanding is some of the hapu decided that they would withdraw their mandate of NAMTOC actually representing them, and then there was a period where they basically reformed, and we now have what's commonly known as THORC. So it was a period of change, essentially.
So in fact, if I refresh your memory, in the minutes of October the 25th minutes, in fact, the minutes describe NAMTOC having been disestablished.
Yeah, that's probably a reasonably...
And that was the organisation we were using, or sorry, the Public Arts Panel was using to form its position from a hapu position.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan. Councillor, actually, I'll go to Zoom now. Councillor Thompson, please. Sorry, Martin, her hand went up just before yours.
I've got a couple of questions on a slightly different wavelengths, more focused on the information that we get in this next report. I'm interested, what does the council currently do in terms of, I guess, promoting understanding of our history? You know, what do we do in terms of the museum and other art fests and otherwise? And what is envisaged by staff in terms of ways that we could do that better going forward, or what might be, I guess, the scope of that report in that sense?
So the museum has a strategy, and it has a whole lot of actions under that strategy and platforms. This is probably a little bit wider and going on from what Councillor Robb said before with some of the previous work that's been done and reflected in some of our park management plans. It's probably, in a broader sense, Councillor Thompson, to look at and work with others on an interpretation plan for the city. Other large cities have these types of plans, and it's not just about putting books on sticks such as interpretation signs and things like that, but it's looking at the wider way of how we can tell those stories, and having signage and things like that as part of it to tell stories, but it might be ephemeral art, it might be sculpture, it might be a whole different ways of doing it. And I think you see Toti have done that at Sappermore Jones Place. Yes, they have a statue, but they also have the little eyepiece, and you can see some black and white photographs of Horace Moore Jones and other things. So there's different ways of doing it, and I think there's a real opportunity where we could work with Tainui, with the university, with historians, a whole bunch of different people to actually have a bit of a plan around that so we can tell those stories in a way that brings the city to life.
There's also, Lance, you can talk to with the current public art policy, a requirement to work with Thorpe in terms of understanding the broad, well not broad actually, the specific historical reference to any potential public art as well.
Correct. So the public art development process is one where we get organisations that come to us with offerings, and then they work closely with council around those throughout processes so that they can be placed in public and civic areas. The museum itself, though, is all about telling stories, and generally we have cultural history, we have science, and we have a number of other outcome areas there with a big education focus too for our young folk.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, if I can just carry on with a follow-up question there.
Yep.
I was also interested, so there's been a lot of discussion around commemorating New Zealand land wars and having, I think, in October is a date around there. And I'm just wondering, is there a role the city can play in terms of having some sort of event or commemoration that would be, inclusive and actually an opportunity for storytelling and things? And what thought has gone into that?
There has been some thought in the past. I know that Cherie and others are just reviewing their programs. Obviously COVID's upset a lot of things, and being able to produce exhibitions and things like that was put on hold for a couple of months, essentially with lockdown. So we're having to relook at everything at the moment. And you're pretty Matariki celebrations are obviously cancelled this year because of the timing and that sort of thing. So I think yes, there's an opportunity. How much we can do is probably we'll have to have a good look at that and come back to you.
Okay, but it could be something that's reported back to us as, once there's been consultation around options for long-term plan and things as well, even if it isn't able to be accommodated in current budgets.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you. No, that's all for now, thank you.
No more questions here?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. No, good stuff. Councillor Geller.
Two issues. One, just to Lance, I think I heard Councillor Pascoe, we're going to do a bit of a micro dive around, what happened 8 years ago in terms of the quality of our iwi and hapu consultation from learnings. Have I got that right? 7 years ago.
17.
I think Councillor Rob was talking about a report that came to council in 2003 and was at a 3-year development and incubation period. So, but yes, as well as the other councillor.
Because I've read through the public, and excellent panel. I can, obviously some very good progressive people on that panel, but what seemed to be missing was, from what I've searched for, was exactly who and where and how the consultation process happened with iwi and hapu. So if we can get further information, just purely from a learning point of view, that would be useful.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, thank you. Just, Richard, and I acknowledge the courtesy of advice from the Office of the Mayor with regard to the situation as it developed, with regard to the removal of the statue. Can you just clarify again, the police component, because clearly there's a property damage issue and a health and safety issue. I want to just repeat those two, because obviously what I'm looking for was the trigger by which you just, made the operational decision to remove the said statue.
So the trigger for me was the broader health and safety concerns, whether it stayed there and added stress and increased tension to what is probably already a reasonably tense moment in our history, in global history. And also secondly, The risk I perceived it is whether or not the statute was removed at that point of time, following the march, it would have been removed at some point of the time associated with that. If it was stopped by the police the following day, it would come down at some point. So I was trying to effectively remove a risk in an interim basis until such time as a more informed decision could happen. Now, whether the police had made a decision, and we've seen that in a number of cases, to step in and actually, and we could have actually hired security to do the same, to be honest, it may well have been a contribution to a larger situation as well. So, and I'm not an expert in that area, but I just made the prudent decision to make a decision. And like I said, it's an interim decision, and unfortunately it falls now at your feet as elected members to make the next decision in its journey. But in my experience, you've known from my history that I'm reasonably quick to react when it comes to health and safety issues. I don't sit around and wait, I just get on with it.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Councillor... beg your pardon, Mangai Tua.
Thanks, Mr Chair. Two questions and a small point of correction. Like Councillor Pascoe and Councillor Gallagher, really interested in looking at what consultation was had with Waikato Tainui back in 2012, so I won't labour that point. Next question for General Manager Lance is August, does that provide you enough time to bring back a program of work? It looks pretty comprehensive.
We know the interest in this and the urgency, and we take direction from the committee, but we thought it was prudent that we put all hands to the pump and do that and have that briefing. I think it's about 5 or 6 days before the committee meeting, so that there can be some free and frank and we can get that clarity on the scope and what elected members are looking for, the amount of contextual information. And some of the feedback today has been really useful too, so I appreciate that. So, yep, we'll do the best we can, and I think you'll be reasonably happy with what we come back with.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's really important topic and some important conversations to be had, and to my mind now there's no need to rush that work. It's best, I think, we do it in a comprehensive way. We'll leave that to your judgment on making that timing. And small correction on point 40 of the report, the Māngai were advised as elected members after the decision had been made. I just want to make that correction in the report.
Okay. Kia ora, Ali. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Chair, look, I just want to pick up on the question that Councillor Wilson was asking about NAMTOC and what position it was in at the time that the decision was made, because I just didn't pick it up. So was NAMTOC, which is the organisation that the council went for iwi consultation, was it in place when this decision was made, or was it not in place? I just wasn't clear.
It was going through a period of change, so it was they had other priorities at that time. It'd be fair to say, but we're still having a look through our records, and I've still got a couple of former staff members to talk to. A couple of people are intimately involved with this. Have actually left the council now, so yeah. So yes, it was an unusual time, and the thing which is interesting about this whole process was it was quite fast as well as compared to some other processes we followed around public art, because the Gallagher's 75th anniversary was in March, so they were looking at the approvals, get them, work through the process as expeditiously as possible before Christmas, get the approvals, we have the break in January and all that sort of thing, get the sculpture made and then get it put in. So
okay.
Yeah.
So and was there Tainui input involved in this, in NAMTOC?
So it's hapu representation.
Yeah.
Look, what I've read so far is that I can't see any consultation with Waikato Tainui with the iwi, but we will carry on looking at. We've got a system called Content Manager. We'll look at the records and those sorts of things and talk to some more people before the next meeting.
Okay,
I'm just going to talk in general in terms of the question I think you're asking as well. So effectively we rely now, I'll describe the current situation for Thorpe to provide our avenue for fully understanding the various hapus views and the various around the city. That relationship with Thorpe is endorsed by Waikato Tainui, and back in the day, I can't talk about post this establishment, as Councillor Wilson referred to it. NAMTOC was endorsed as representing all of the hapu in Hamilton at that point in time. And then I think what the General Manager said, leading into that final decision, various hapu had removed their mandate to NAMTOC to talk on their behalf. So it's slowly changed forms. And soon after that, we employed in-house resource, and the resource was through our Mona. And thank you, sir. And also we entered into a relationship with Thorpe to provide those services. We, at that stage, had been set up with mandate to represent the hapu within Waikato, within Hamilton.
Thanks, Richard. Just one more question for the CE.
Certainly.
Just in regards to removing the statue, so, I mean, there could have been an option on the day of the march to, you know, to have police and to have security and all that protecting the statue. But, I mean, presumably, even if the statue didn't come down then, it could have come down any time. Could have come down in the middle of the night. You would have needed security 24 hours, I presume.
Well, so I talked about I talked about a number of solutions with my team, including we could well have left it there, and there's part of the risk management I was attempting to manage was the reputational aspect of Hamilton as a whole, and having a confrontation between security guards and marchers at that point in time wasn't necessarily an outcome I was trying to pursue. I also talked to my team, could we just drop a container on top of it in terms of as an interim protection, but as soon as we removed the container, it became an issue that it could be removed yet again. So every solution I had a temporary measure of it, and the only one that had a quasi-permanent interception was that of removing the statue until such time as we decide where it goes. And the conversations have been that, and I've made it very clear that, you know, and my recommendation to council would be if they wish to put the statue back, the appropriate contextual information and history surrounding that statue would make the most sense. And I believe in that case it would be a lot safer because it provides that context. Without that broader context, I still believe it was going to incite certain parts of the community to have some issues with it.
And if it had got through that march, but let's say 3 o'clock on Sunday morning, someone had decided to take it down with no one there, there were the same concerns for the underground car park structure and all that?
My primary concern was there was a risk at that point because of the underground car park. And right when I made that decision, it was right in the midst of a heavy level of conversations regarding the Black Lives Matters and various statues around the country as well. And I didn't want to tempt fate by just overlooking that. I would have been further questioned if I had given that context and not made a decision. So I was making the decision at a very specific point in time. Would I have made the decision again, given the nature of the individual who was making the threats and what had happened previously? I probably would have still made that same decision to remove it, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm going to move the staff recommendation that we receive the report and that we request the CE do come back to the Community Committee on the 13th of August 2020 with a work programme relating to matters that will inform a future decision on the Captain Hamilton statue. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robb. Councillor, you have dropped off the board. You're right? Okay. Thank you. Okay, that's great. All right, we will move into, there being no more questions, we'll move into debate now on that one. I just want to say we've got a really good opportunity here to march ahead. We, as a city, have been rightfully patted on the back about how we responded to a desperate situation when it comes to COVID. And this is another one of those tight spots we find ourselves in. But I have complete confidence that with the people in this room and the people out of this room, that we can come up with a great solution. So some of the conversation is hard. Some of the conversation is uncomfortable. Some mistakes have been made in the past, and definitely mistakes have been made in the past. But that all adds to the learning. To me, what's important is what is here and now and what we do with it going ahead. We have an opportunity to be celebrated as one of the most progressive and mature cities. We have a real opportunity here to stamp our mark on the world with how we deal with this. And I have absolutely no doubt we have the right minds around the table to initiate that discussion. I commend the staff in putting this back till August because there are 3 strands of work that are very important. There is the O'Malley report, which was commissioned with regard to street names last term, and we're ready to read it, and we're ready for it to be read. There's the arts policy, which is always getting updated, and there's the Māori strategy as well. And if you do one of those in isolation, it messes up the other ones. So I think if we bring that work together and be brave, have some tough conversations, but have a very clear idea of the community that we want for our children and for our tamariki, then if we go with that intention in mind, we'll get through this. We will get through this. So I'll reserve my right to reply at the end of it, but Councillor O'Leary, you're up.
To debate, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments. Having heard, I think that the very long list of responses that the CEO said he went through and his thought process, I support his decision for public safety. As he was talking, I was thinking, you know, the headline could have been quite different for the city. It could have been somebody gets damaged, somebody gets, you know, injured or critically injured. I'm sure the thing's damn heavy, and had that been, you know, a rope thrown around it and pulled on the back of a car, somebody could have been quite hurt. You know, part of the roof of a car park could have fallen in, and we would have been, the headlines and the story would have been quite different. Look, for me, I've always said in this chamber that our history is important, but all of our history is important. We can't go back and rewrite it, but we have to tell the story, and if and we have to tell all of the story and all of our history so that we, you know, we understand what created our city and what's important to us now, more importantly. So I look forward to the discussion. I do hope that this is enough time for staff to bring that information to us. It may be that we receive the information and a whole, you know, a work plan comes out of that. I'd be happy with that. But it is important that actually all sides of the debate, and like any debate, there are two sides here, and there are two very passionate sides. But it was a process that we used back then to put in a piece of art, and we need to learn for the future. Sitting around this table for 12 years, it doesn't look like I was at that particular meeting, but I was certainly on that committee. No, I chaired part of it. I don't think I chaired that, but anyway, even if I did, that's fine. I'm not on the voting record. But all public art is controversial. What's important is that we can all agree on the story that it's telling us, and that we make sure that everybody has a voice and everybody is involved in the future. So I'm looking forward to all that wealth of information that staff will bring us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Pascoe.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And look, I'll be very quick. We did a rather fast response when the statue was damaged last time, and I think we probably were at the same sort of risk here today, that we could have taken a fast response to what was likely to happen, and the appropriate action that our CEO took. So I think it's important now that we take a little time, and I hope August is the time frame that's needed, but an opportunity that we can bring together all of the issues, not just the statue, but all of the issues, and some of which we've got current reports being done, we've got some older reports there, and it's an opportunity perhaps to bring all of those together, to bring together the groups that have an interest in this, try and resolve the issues, and aim with all groups to achieve an outcome that's beneficial and lasting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Mayor Paula.
Thank you, Chair Bunting. There are times when a leader must have courageous conversations with the community, and this is clearly one of them. I agreed with staff that removing the statue was absolutely the right thing to do. The Gallagher family, who had kindly donated it, also believed it was the right thing to do. In fact, in terms of public safety, I am convinced it was the right thing to do. This hasn't made me very popular in many quarters. I'm a bit saddened at some of the reaction I've had from small pockets of our community on both sides of the debate. But I have been buoyed up by a great deal of public support as well. I didn't run for mayor to be popular, obviously, and I took a very brave decision. Me personally, I don't believe the statue should have ever been in Civic Square in the first place. Civic Square is a public place where everyone should feel welcome, and we've known for some time that people in our community, some people in our community do feel unwelcome. Waikato Tainui have made it clear what their position is. There's some very angry people about the decision we've made. They're angry with me. But there is just as many who've been incredibly supportive and positive, and I thank them. So what is done is done. Now what we need to do is to turn this event into something really positive, because I think the removal of the statue could now be a positive development for this city. And I'm urging Hamilton to grab this opportunity with me. We'd already begun, in fact, talking with Waikato Tainui about our city's history and what it meant for our city. But Waikato Tainui are only one player in this conversation. We're all stakeholders. No one group gets to dominate the conversation, because I believe to go forward, we need to go forward, and the only way we can go forward is together. So leadership can be uncomfortable, but I think leadership is a platform for all voices to be heard. Now is the time for Hamilton, and I believe New Zealand, actually being watched by the world, to have a conversation about who we memorialise and why and how we understand where we've come from and where we need to go as a city and country. It is about both sides of the story. It is our job as a council to be brave and to facilitate that conversation, which is rightly a conversation for the whole city, not just the city council. This is, in fact, the very best time to have a courageous city-wide conversation.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. Mango to Ua.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the Chief Executive has made a hard decision under urgency in extraordinary times. There's a Māori proverb that goes, he ha te kai o te rangatira, he kōrero, and that translates to what is the food of chiefs of leaders? It is knowledge, it is communication. And so I think we're at the perfect junction now to have a deliberate conversation based on some good research and to set a platform to go forward. As I said in questions, I don't think we need to rush this through. I think we need to take the time to put this work program together, noting that we're not actually bringing the actual work program in detail to the next committee. We're bringing the work program, but just to make sure we've got enough time to make sure we bring a comprehensive program forward.
Thank you, Manga Ali. Councillor Gallagher.
Yes, thank you. I note Mayor Paula's words and the obviously words and views of Mayor King before her in this area, and I acknowledge both. And I certainly acknowledge Mangai Oli and his wise words, which basically, more or less, hating to use a particular advertisement, good things take time. And it's very important that we don't, as an organisation or as elected officials, talk to each other, particularly to our Tainui partners through the media, that we want to redevelop and refocus that particular relationship. I unfortunately couldn't be at the informal meeting last night, but clearly I glean that there were some positive outcomes that came out of that meeting last night. And obviously I understand that with regard to the Dr. O'Malley report, they want time just to give the courtesy to a number of groups within our city to inform them of the report, but I can't stress enough that we do need to give a degree of urgency to that consultation, because obviously it's a document that we want our broader community to be able to read. As Councillor McPherson mentioned, it doesn't necessarily add anything. In some ways we didn't, or some of us didn't know, but it's a very good summary, brought together a lot of good information. And obviously in a partnership, the city may have to say to a particular group, well obviously to Tainui, at a particular time we can't accede to all of your requests, but the point being is that we listen with mutual respect and understanding. And I'm acutely aware, in terms of good things taking time, I mean the 14th of March 2019 when Tainui first responded to previous Mayor King's report around naming issues, etc. we certainly cannot accuse them of being, if you like, impatient. So it seems to me, Mr. Chair, this is calm, respectful decision. And isn't it wonderful that New Zealand Aotearoa history is going to be taught in our schools? Let there be a local Kirikiriroa Hamilton component being taught in our schools. Let all of our children get to learn about these figures, the role of Captain Hamilton, Bryce, Fontemsky, Gray, and when you do some thorough reading, in various cases it does bring up some, if you like, what we call uncomfortable truths. But as a descendant of one of the original fencibles who came to this country in 1848, in that case, and just bear with me and then I will finish, who came from Ireland, second son, didn't inherit the farm, needed a job during the devastating Irish famines. And of course the British Army at the time was the big employer. So the young lads joined up the fencibles. And so, dare I say it, as part of the historical dialogue, we get to talk about the big context of our history on all sides. And I just leave you with a thought, and how inspiring. At Hamilton Festival the other year, I went to a play, I think co-authored by
Start winding up, please,
Professor Tom Raw and Witi Hamara, which talked about the history of our area and the issue of conciliation and partnership and grow, and how the intermingling of blood and ancestry and cultures. So hopefully in that spirit, Mr. Chair, we move on as a city that represents all of our citizens of Kirikiriroa Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gallagher. On now for a televised report, we go to Councillor Sarah via Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I just wanted to say our history as a city, and also in our identity as a city. And so I'm really excited that we are having this conversation and that it's opening up the opportunity for us to actually look wider beyond this statue and look at the ways that we tell our stories throughout the whole of the city, whether it be through art or otherwise. I think that we put on Anzac Parade events, and that's a way every year for people to actually remember what happened, to keep that fresh in their memory so that we learn from our history. And while I think that what we do going forward has to be in consultation, so I don't want to put forward any solutions.
1 minute, Sarah.
Suggestions, but I think that there are ways that we can, maybe it is through events actually address this in a really meaningful way. So a statute's not really a very good educational piece when it comes to actually helping people to learn from what's happened in the past. It's just really just a snapshot and doesn't have a lot of context, and there could be some really really good and meaningful ways that we could be helping people and learning from our history going forward. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Chair Mark. I think that the Chief Executive made the right decision, and the Mayor as well, but not particularly for the reasons of public safety. I think that was a collateral benefit, if you like. I think they made the right decision for cultural and community reasons. And I'd like to say that I want to thank in this room Kaumatua Timi Maipi, because twice now in the last 2 years he has caused us to have a conversation that we've been extremely reluctant to have, that we'd almost turned a blind eye to, even though it was simmering out there in the community, and my friend Councillor Blind Freddie could see that it was going to come up and bite us. Martin has defended that sort of situation, that slowness, as with a mainland cheese ad, good things take time. But in this case, the cheese was at risk of going mouldy because we were taking so long for the debate. At least we're having the debate now, and thank you, Timmy, for your part in helping us do that, because certainly it was his actions previously that led to the previous mayor inviting him and other people to address our meeting, which then led to the report by Vincent O'Malley being done. And having read that report, which was pretty eye-opening, I'd heard bits of it before. I'd never seen it all collected together like that. And if on finishing it, all the 4 different names in there, I'm thinking, don't worry about Captain Hamilton. If you're worried about that, try reading about Bryce. There was some real eye-openers in there. Personally, would be quite happy if that particular statue was melted down and used for something more useful, but I recognise that debate is yet to come. Captain Hamilton literally had nothing to do with our history. If you read some of the evidence in there, it was at a regimental dinner where they'd probably imbibed a few wines or whiskies that his name came up as the naming for this. I think the Hamilton that we have in our room over there has had a lot more to do with Hamilton City than the one that the statue was of. I would just like to say that I'm pleased we're having the debate. It is overdue. I don't want the cheese to get mouldy. Let's get on with it and have a good debate in August.
Cheese. Very good. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Councillor Taylor, Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be supporting these recommendations today, and hopefully we in Tainui and the city as a whole will be able to arrive at a satisfactory agreement. I totally agree with the temporary removal of Captain Hamilton. I back the CE's actions totally, if only to avoid someone pulling it out in a rage or hurting someone or damaging the statue or the underground car park. And I think it would have been irresponsible to leave the statue there with the march going ahead, knowing it was a target. And we did know it was a target. How it came to be a target and what that means going forward is what I want to talk about. Obviously, the heightened emotions as a result of Black Lives Matter played a key part in that. The death of George Floyd in custody was a monstrous outrage and an evil act, no doubt about that. But I think Black Lives Matter, especially in New Zealand, has been a sad way to remember him. It has taken us backwards as a city and a nation, in my view. When I think about this country post the mosque attacks, and I think of the peaceful, loving vigils that took place and brought us together, the Black Lives marches have been a sad comparison. Instead of a message of peace and healing and a plea to love and be kind to each other, we've had angry marches and threats of vandalism right here in the city. So Black Lives Matter has done nothing to accelerate this process of better understanding and recognising our joint history in New Zealand. In fact, by trying to present our society as a simplistic carbon copy of the US race divide, I think it's actually hardened the attitudes. We, and the train had already left the station. We and Tainui had commissioned jointly and paid for a historical report on Captain Hamilton and street names to look at how we represent our history. We as a council had been waiting on Tainui to read that report. We've not been holding up the process, we've been waiting on Tainui for some time. I think there's an awful lot, is that another minute, Mark? Yep.
Yep, it's another minute.
There's an awful lot we shouldn't be proud of in our colonial past. There's stuff we should be ashamed of, no doubt. But I'm from European stock, and there are things I'm proud of. Pioneers, the forebears who came out here with nothing and worked in the harshest of conditions, who made us look soft with their incredible work ethic. I'm not wiping all of that away because of some crazy US cop and because someone has joined the dots and deemed our country as a total failure as well. I'm not wiping all that away because of some woke response to the outrage in the US, which takes no heed of the situation here, doesn't even try to register where we're at with our own cultural journey as a country. I'm all for telling the story the way it was. We should have the context, we should understand what happened and why, and we should accept that there were bad ideas, bad principles, and at times bad people involved. I've always said I didn't think Captain Hamilton should be placed in Civic Square in a vacuum. I think all historical statues and artworks should have a context. It would have made more sense to have a much wider historical context when displaying these statues or artworks. Both Māori and European figures should be represented. I don't know if we'll all agree on changing street names and the city's name, but coming up with a vision of public artwork and statues telling the whole scope of our history is a good place to start. Hopefully that is the path we go down now without any more threats or intimidation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Mark. Can I first start by saying very clearly that I too support the CEO's decision. I'm adding my voice to the chorus. The reality is the decision was a strategic one and I think helped us de-escalate something that could have been unnecessarily violent and provocative, and we didn't need that. I am now very pleased that we're going to have a more meaningful discussion about how we move forward. I believe one of the things that I celebrate is, as a city and as a country, we're mature enough to have that discussion, because I think that's absolutely essential. I'm saddened, if I'm to be honest, that some have taken the opportunity to try to leverage off the inhuman acts that occurred in the United States and somewhat attach themselves to Black Lives Matter marches by trying to leverage their position to trying to push forward their agenda in what was a very, and is a very, tragic set of events. When I look at how Captain Hamilton arrived at Civic Square, there is a process that Council followed. And I'm not at all saying that our processes are always perfect. In fact, I'm saying that we constantly need to evolve. But we had an arts panel. They did go out and speak to local hapu, albeit Namtok in the end lost favour and was disestablished, and Thorpe has now replaced them. But my critical point is this: if Tainui is going to sit above that, hapu, iwi, Tainui's the iwi, if they're going to assert a position that's sometimes inconsistent with the hapu, how are we as a local government going to manage that difference? And it's a real challenge and something we will have to focus on when we have that meaningful dialogue. So I totally agree with Manga Ollie, where he talks about there's a lot of substance in this next discussion, and we better not rush it because it's really important and there's lots of moving parts. In my final few seconds, I want to say something very clear. Captain Hamilton statue has a place in this city. I truly believe that. And we need to have a meaningful dialogue about where that is. I don't think in a true partnership you can unilaterally rewrite somebody else's history, even if it's unpleasant, even if it's hard to swallow. But we manage relationships by embracing everybody's history and communicating it. So we've got to do that in a constructive way. I think the City of Hamilton's name is very clear, it's Hamilton, but I'm very proudly carry a bilingual business card that says Kirikiri Roa. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Canada, a country that embraces bilingualism. We have nothing to be fearful about doing that. And I look forward to the discussion about street names, but I just warn us again, do we want to be involved in unilaterally rewriting somebody's history? Are we better not to formulate a strategy that brings us together going forward?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair.
Ryan Hamilton.
I wasn't going to talk, but I'm actually really inspired by my colleagues here today. I think particularly the last few speakers have really touched me, and I'm encouraged to be leading a city with that kind of spirit and attitude. Councillor Ewan's point on embracing everybody's history, I think, is really important. Dave, I admire you, how you're a constant agitator and your ability to challenge the status quo, even if you use all sorts of means and methods of getting there. Ollie, I acknowledge your words today and your special place at the table, your words of using this as a platform to move forward and to harness the knowledge. Martin, as always, very wise words, and I think you bring some context to our history, which is part of the conversation. Sarah, in Zoomland, I like what she had to say about having lots of voices contributing to the conversation and creating a balanced view and narrative. I think that's really important. And Jeff, I thank you. I think you bring a very balanced view to the conversation, and with passion but measured words as well. So I just acknowledge you and the other speakers as well. So all that to say, I'm excited to be part of this conversation, that we're having a mature, robust, balanced, progressive conversation. So thank you.
Kia ora, Ryan. Okay, look, I'll wrap this up. Thank you very much. I'm really proud to be a part of this room today, where we have such eloquent speakers and such strong thinkers, and some very strong heart in here. My favourite saying, and Ewan and I were chatting about this the other day, is from a movie called Braveheart, and one of the first lines is, "History will call me a liar, but history is written by people who hang the heroes." So it's really interesting that we find ourselves not only grasping to tell appropriate stories about the past, but to be a part of the future and become a part of history, ironically. Isn't it interesting that this statue is becoming more and more significant every day? In fact, the space that it leaves is probably the most significant part of the statue at the moment. And that becomes a very significant part of the story. So I'm delighted that we're moving down this path, and we're going to have some good, honest, brave conversations. Let's leave no stone unturned. Let's get everybody to the table. Not invite them, get them to the table. So no stones left unturned. The future ain't what it used to be. We are going to end up in a place that none of us ideally want. But I can guarantee it's going to be different to where we are at the moment. So I'm very, very, very excited about the way we're going to go ahead, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that group that hopefully brings us to a calm and exciting resolution. Isn't it exciting that we get to not only acknowledge the past honestly, fairly, robustly, but we also get to shape the future? So with that in mind, I will put this to the vote, and we'll do that on the board, please.
The motion is carried unanimously, noting that Councillor Thompson is voting via audio-visual link.
Thank you. All right. Well done, committee. Now we've got 1, 2, 3 more items to get through. One of those is the GM's report. So what do you say we take a 5-minute break to grab a water and get back into it? We'll be back at 4 o'clock. We'll resume. Thank you. 3, 4, 5, 6. Sarah, are you there? No, is Sarah on Zoom there? Oh no, we're right. Just trying to get a quorum. We will machine it. Famous last words. Right, here we go.
No, we're doing the fund next.
We're gonna do the fund because we have staff members who need to shoot away, who are speaking to this. Andy sends his apologies. He's away with an emergency he can't not get to. So we are on item numero 13, and that is on page 68. Mm-hmm.
Do we want to bring up those other bits, Mark?
Which does that mean? Yeah, I think we'll do that right at the start. No, we're going to do the dog park after this. We've got some staff members that need to scorch away, so we are on page 68, which will be item 13.
Do you want me to cover that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right now, this is the COVID response fund, and where we talked during the annual plan about widening the parameters. There's been some discussions around it since then between myself and Lance and Ewan, and we think we've got to a pretty good place with it, but we'll let the group decide. So if you'd like to speak to it, Lance, please.
Amy, can you bring up those words? So we had a discussion at one of the informal sessions last week, and Councillor Ewan just gave a bit of feedback on that, and we're just we thought it might be prudent to add in a little bit more into the criteria, so if we can bring those up. So pretty much the information we asked for, just to be explicit, the group would do this anyway, is actually ask for financial accounts for the 2-year period prior to the 1st of March 2020, remembering that a lot of these are incorporated societies and that information is available on the charity's website and that sort of thing. And also just so it's explicit whether or not they have received the government wage subsidy and or other government COVID relief funding, because as we circulated some information 3 or 4 weeks ago, that there were some particular funds, especially for creative sector and a few other sports sectors and things like that. And the other thing was, I think elected members are interested in just ensuring that you got the regular update reports like you have been getting through executive update and also through the committee around how the money's been allocated. So we've added in the B that there's weekly reports provided to elected members of Māori Māori on the funding allocation. So sorry to steal the ladies' thunder, we just thought we'd mention that now.
They don't mind the thunder being stolen. Do you any more thunder to add to the...
Chair, could I just suggest that you add to Roman numeral 2, as well as any other funding, because I'm thinking here of Trust Waikato and some of the other funders out there who might have provided some form of, rent relief or other funding during COVID-19?
Yeah, bearing in mind that the process of this one too is, and happy to put it in, process is it actually comes through them before it gets to us in the first place.
So it gets funneled. Okay, no, that's fine then. That's fine.
So this is still a part of that big funnel?
This is part of that funnel. Okay.
This is just the parameters around our part of it.
Okay, no, look, I'm happy then to leave it as it is.
Okay. Anything to add, Helen and Sandra, at this stage? Okay, we'll go to questions. Councillor Gallagher.
With the expanded, so, I mean, obviously there had been a proposal, realistic or not, that then it come back to this committee or council for a final tick-off. What I perhaps want to see is perhaps to Lance or everyone present, or Helen, the checks and balances there, because I just want to avoid a situation where an organisation may have had very unfortunate strategic, poor management, financial management decisions anyway, and may wittingly or unwittingly dress it up as a kind of the result of the COVID scenario, when in fact there's much deeper systemic problems, and it's really a matter of, the veracity of saying this is about a COVID-related relief fund. It's not anything to do with an organisation that has to come to us for help for all other range of reasons, and I don't, if you can just help me on that one, I just want to, it's fail-safe, that's all.
So Councillor Gallagher, in in the criterion attachment 2 under 3, what will not be funded is operating deficits that occurred prior to COVID-19. So that partially covers off that, and also under 4, what must accompany the application proof of the impact of COVID-19. So if it was an organisation that was in financial strife 2 years ago and had remained in financial strife, and then COVID-19 no doubt would make the situation worse, we are very clear, the allocation committee can be very clear on the delineation between the two scenarios.
Because I know Councillor Wilson, to me, was and it certainly unlocked in my consciousness stream, so to speak, that danger. So I think, and I'll be interested if Councillor Wilson's very happy with the resolution, because I just want to cover that off.
Yep, absolutely, and it's, I'm quite confident that we're going to address that. There's going to be big checks and balances in this allocation committee. I was going to move it with Councillor Ewan seconding it, if you're happy to, sir.
No, I'm happy to move. Second it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. Martin, is you happy with that?
Yeah, look, if you're happy, I think you've got it. I just, you, with respect, what you've told me doesn't need to come back here, because there's enough safety nets within your committee and the criteria to head off an organisation that may be using this fund for reasons which are nothing to do.
Yeah, we believe so.
Thank you.
Thank you. And good points raised. Mayor Southgate.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. You won't be aware yet, Mark, because you were unable to meet yesterday for conflict, but at the Strategic Risk and Assurance Committee,